Hey, paisanos, Cody Baynard here, and today I'm going to be discussing my thoughts on the latest record from Hypnos titled Sheol. Hypnos is a French avant-garde progressive metal band that utilizes elements of post-rock and metal as well as gent and folk, which is also fronted by singer, guitarist, songwriter, and filmmaker Emmanuel Jasua. Their sound has really intrigued and fascinated me for about a year now. For it's not too often that you hear all these different sounds come together in the same package in a way that feels this seamless. And it results in some pretty solid and well-made records. And when it comes to their previous catalog, I do find myself to be the most fond of the more concise Acid Mist Tomorrow from 2011. However, there have always been some things that I took issue with related to their past records that prevented me from really loving their music and also preventing me from feeling like they have been living up to the potential that they showcase on a lot of their past catalog. The main issues that I have are that a lot of their songs utilize very similar formulas. While the songs themselves aren't necessarily, formulaic or accessible in a very, verse chorus type song structure, what they often do is that they would introduce like a soft ambient post-rock folky passage, followed by some heavy genty riffs, followed by some more ambient post-rock passages, followed by more genty riffs, and they would just sort of rinse and repeat this until their songs decide to end. And they often pile on a bunch of ideas like this over the course of these long epics that range from like 10 minutes to sometimes 15 minutes. And it can make listening to a whole album of theirs, especially when it comes to stuff like 2016's Shores of the Abstract Line, feel kind of repetitive and excessive. And along with that, even though like they are totally capable of busting out some pretty mean, thick, genty grooves, there are definitely quite a few times on some of their other albums where the more avant-garde and post-rock and folk elements of their sound can feel significantly more interesting than the more prog metal and gent-oriented parts of their sound. Regardless of these things that prevented me from really loving their past catalog, I was still thoroughly excited for this brand new record from them. If you don't count their technically fourth record released in 2018 titled Alba, which was not only a film score for Emmanuel Jesua's movie under the same name, but was also released under the band's side project name called A Backwards Glance Onto a Traveled Road. Sheol is technically the band's fifth record and is, in my opinion, probably the closest thing that the band have come to reaching the potential that I feel like they have been promising but not quite living up to on past records. How is that? Hard for me to really entirely know because a lot of what they do on here is not exactly that new for them in the grand scheme of things. We have a lot of the same very like back and forth zigzag types of song structures with softer passages and heavy parts and soft parts and heavy parts repeating over and over again in this very cinematic way. And the riffing styles that they take on are pretty similar overall. We have lots of very tight, technical, and very rhythmically driven guitar passages that are often that feel somewhat reminiscent of something that I would expect from like a Gojira or even like something like Meshuggah or Vildhjarta. But there's something about the way that they execute the sounds and styles that they have become known for on this record that feels significantly more tasteful, refined, and emotionally charged. All of this can be felt throughout the album's opening 13-minute epic title track, which begins on a very kind of somber and ambient note to kind of set up to pretty much just set the tone for the rest of the song and also the rest of the album to come. After this brief little intro, we have some really punishing riffs and vocals that come into the forefront, and from there, the whole song is a really dynamic and also very beautiful piece of music with lots of very melancholic, softer, almost kind of folky passages that contrast the really heavy, crushing, thick guitar work. In particular, when we get to the second half of part two, we have this very elongated, softer interlude section, if you can call it that, with these very melancholic keyboards as well as some very fragile, clean vocal harmonies from Emmanuel. And when the tension built from this really lengthy section of the song reaches a climax, it is really powerful and really cathartic. Following this almost post-rock style crescendo, the band decided to throw in one last really tight, technical, djenty breakdown to end things off. Some of the riffs and patterns that the band tried to utilize almost take on a style that was coined by Vildhjarta called thal, with these very strange, angular rhythms, as well as some really interesting guitar wizardry where the band just use like fucking every string on their guitar from like the highest notes possible all the way down to the lowest notes possible. And it is quite captivating as well as mind-bending. And a lot of the same can be said about the album's following track titled Bone Dust. Comparing this piece to the opener, there's not that much new that can be really said about it, but regardless, the execution of that sound is still just as beautiful and powerful. There's some really lovely folky instrumentation towards the beginning of the song, and then as the song goes through several different switch ups and ideas throughout its 9.5-minute runtime, towards the end, we get a really interesting section where we get, another very weird, mind-boggling breakdown under a time signature change from 4/4 to 6/8, I think. But on top of that, we also have some very melancholic vocal harmonies from Emmanuel, which I think helps to add a lot of atmosphere to this very complex, crazy, technical wankery. Well, I wouldn't say necessarily wankery, but you get the idea. And so to contrast these first two really dynamic and as well as at times really heavy opening two epics, we have a very sad, folky ballad titled Tauka Part 1, which is the prequel to the equally sad closer from their last album, A Distant Dark Source, titled Tauka Part 2. Due to its very reflective and mournful and cinematic nature, as well as its placement on the album, this track kind of does feel reminiscent of what I would expect from some of Opeth's earlier records, such as songs like Benighted from Still Life or Harvest from Blackwater Park. But it would be really silly of me to call this a straight up Opeth knockoff, because that's not what it is. I love the guitar work on this number, and Emmanuel's vocal melodies, as always at this point, are very beautiful, very thoughtful, and also quite memorable. The next song, which is also one of the album's singles, titled Lava from the Sky, is pretty much what you would expect from Hypnos at this point on the record. But regardless, I still love this song. Around like the middle point, we have some really interesting usage of what I think is a charango, which gives the song a vibe that doesn't feel too dissimilar from something that I would expect from like Aukai or something. To my knowledge, this track is somewhat of a fan favorite, and it's really easy for me to see why, because While this is, in essence, a pretty standard hypno song, quote unquote, a lot of what they do on here is still executed with a ton of heart and with a lot of competence and precision, as well as emotion. Admittingly, when we get to the album's closing two epics, titled The Dreamer and His Dream and Slow Steams of Darkness, the album maybe does begin to lose just a touch of its luster and its power. But regardless, there's still lots of great things to enjoy about these two songs. The Dreamer and His Dream, for instance, begins with some very eerie and tense ambiances before we get into some very frantic drumming, which helps to create a very urgent atmosphere during the first leg of this piece. And along with that, some of the acoustic guitar melodies don't necessarily feel too out of place of what I would expect from like a Les Discrets song. By the way, a Hypnos and Les Discrets collab would be fucking dope. Just saying. And as what you would expect from the album at this point, there's some beautiful, softer sections that adds a lot of contrast while still also being very emotive and vulnerable. Then we get to the album's closer, Slow Steams of Darkness, which admittingly doesn't really do all that much to really make itself a very conclusive way to end the whole album, other than, you know, it's just being another hypno song with some like extra really loud gain towards the end to create like a massive climax. And to me, that's still not quite enough to really make it feel like a proper ending, because it still just feels like it wouldn't feel out of place in the middle, and also its, you know, big climax still doesn't really feel as emotionally cathartic or powerful as other songs preceding it, like the aforementioned title track as well as Bone Dust. However, this song is still really freaking good. My personal favorite part of this long 14-minute epic is around like the 5-minute mark of part 2, when we have some really hyper technical guitar work that almost kind of gives off almost Animals as Leaders or Jason Richardson vibe. It's very, very fast and gripping and exciting. And I also really love the main vocal refrain that is present during the song's intro, as well as around its last leg when building up towards its finale. So yeah, even in the record's most underwhelming moments, there's still a lot to really admire and appreciate about this thing. And this is honestly the first time, I think, in Hypnos's career where they made an album that I can actually see myself going back to on a regular basis without feeling overtly challenged or intimidated by everything going on. And again, how they do this is hard for me to really put my finger on, but it really just comes down to just the sheer way that they execute everything on here. It's just seamlessly combines the technical ability and the crushingly heavy nature of bands like Meshuggah and Vildhjarta, as well as the emotive, atmospheric post-rock and metal sensibilities of a band like KAUAN or Les Discrets, resulting in a really emotionally charged and dynamic and cinematic and also genuinely quite beautiful album with lots of very interesting moments that stand out and make me want to go back to pretty much any song on this record on their own, as well as in context with the rest of the album. As another minor criticism with this album, even though I do think the songs for the most part work really well in context with everything else, the record does feel maybe a touch too long. It's around 63 minutes, and that in itself can make things still feel pretty intimidating, even if it is less so than other albums, such as the aforementioned A Distant Dark Source. But yeah, I really like this thing. I honestly think it's a pretty freaking great album. And if you want prog metal that is weird, challenging, out there, creative, and unconventional, this is definitely something that I would recommend checking out, especially if you're unfamiliar with this band's sound, just to really appreciate and admire the novelty of their general sound and tone. And so, yeah, those are my thoughts on the latest record from Hypnos. And please let me know in the comments down below, what did you think of this record? Did you enjoy it? Did you not enjoy it? Please feel free to also like and subscribe and comment and all that good stuff. And I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye.